So, an underlying premise of surrogacy and being a surrogate is that you are carrying a child. So, it would seem that if you stop carrying a child, you are no longer a surrogate. So, that brings up a good question. Do surrogates get paid if they miscarry? Let's talk about it. What's up? I'm Corlendos Scott, and I'm a surrogacy attorney. And so my sole focus as an attorney is help people have babies. And we do that through the legal process of helping them through surrogacy, egg donation, sperm donation, and all the forms of assisted reproductive technologies. In this episode, we're going to talk about, do surrogates get paid if they miscarry? We're going to talk about how and what surrogates get paid if they do miscarry. And then we're just going to cover the different types of payments that surrogates receive. Let's dive in. A statistic that may surprise you is this. Approximately 10% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. Yeah, and that even includes surrogacy-related pregnancies. They're not exempt. And it doesn't matter if a surrogate has excellent medical history and followed all the medical recommendations of the doctor to a T. You have to also remember that in gestational carrier arrangements, none of her genetics went into creating that embryo, and that factors in a lot. So it doesn't just hinge on how healthy she is. We also have to consider how healthy that embryo and that fetus is. So when we ask the question, does a surrogate still get paid if she miscarries? We kind of have to talk about how surrogates get paid, when they get paid, why they get paid. But let's start here. Let's start with asking the question, why did the pregnancy end? And let's address it from this angle. Generally, when the surrogate is not at fault for the demise or the end of the pregnancy, surrogate will still be entitled to compensation up to the point where the miscarriage happened. And sometimes, if she has to deliver or if it results in a stillbirth, she would still get some compensation for the delivery. And these are just general terms. Every surrogacy agreement is going to have its own specific terms, but we're talking in generalities as the process typically goes. There's something that's very important to remember about surrogacy in general. And this is something that the opponents of surrogacy like to harp on, and the proponents of surrogacy like to reiterate and enforce. A surrogate is not paid for a baby. Let me say that again. A surrogate and the compensation she receives is not for giving someone a baby. You know, since, 1865 or so, it's been kind of illegal in our country to sell human beings. You know, today we call it human trafficking, and I'm positive that Liam Neeson has at least 6 movies where he's, taking care of that problem. But we cannot and we do not sell babies. So a surrogate's compensation should not be hinged on whether or not she gives the parent a baby. A surrogate's compensation is based on a number of things, none of which involves handing over a human to another human. We're talking about her time, her effort, the discomfort she experiences, the pain, the inconvenience, all of the things that go into her carrying and delivering a baby for someone else. Those are the reasons that she's being compensated, not for the human being itself. So that leads us to conclude that yes, she still deserves compensation based on what she has accomplished, based on the amount of pain, based on the amount of inconvenience, based upon the amount of time she has spent carrying the baby, because again, that's why she's getting paid. So we're not so concerned with tying it to when the baby leaves her tummy and goes into the arms of the intended parents. So when we're asking the question, does she still get paid around a miscarriage, we have to talk about where she's come up to that point. So up to that point, she's probably been carrying for a number of weeks, maybe even months, if we're talking about a miscarriage. Because of course, a miscarriage, assumes the fact that she's pregnant. So in those instances, she's probably going to be looking at getting some kind of prorated compensation. And that compensation might include her monthly payment, maybe include some type of monthly stipend for the incidentals around everything she has to do, from going to the doctor to getting medications and getting vitamins and paying for parking and all those kinds of things. It may include something around lost wages, where if she was taken off of work due to some kind of need for bed rest or restricted activity, she would get some kind of money for that. There may also be payment to an insurance company for her health insurance premiums. Also, there could be possibly housekeeping and child care, medical expenses, any kind of out-of-pocket expenses. So there are a number of things that she could have earned up to the point of the miscarriage. And yes, even though she miscarried, she wouldn't be required to give that back. She has earned that at the point at which it was paid. Now, an exception to this is when the reason for the miscarriage is due to the fault or the negligence of the surrogate. If the surrogate ignored her doctor's orders or recommendations, if the surrogate violated the contract by living a harmful lifestyle, including alcohol or drugs, or if she had something that she didn't report, if she was dishonest in her medical reporting. These are all things that lead us to say that she violated the contract. And if she's violated the contract, most contracts will say that she will be in breach of the contract and the parents are under no obligation to continue paying her. And there may even be some legal penalties where she has to reimburse the parents for expenses that they have come out of pocket for. So while we're here, let's just talk about when and how surrogates get paid. But before we do me a quick favor, real quick. Just go click the like button. Click it right now and we'll be right back to it. Just go ahead, click it. It makes me feel real good. All right, so let's talk about when and how surrogates get paid. Again, everybody is different, so every surrogacy contract is going to have its own specific terms tailored to the people who are entering into the agreement. But there are some common themes. Now, if you're working with an agency will typically have a compensation package that is standard to all of the surrogates that work with them. So you'll know right up front what the surrogate gets in regards to main compensation or pregnancy compensation, with regards to monthly allowance, with regards to maternity clothing stipends, with regards to mileage reimbursements. The agency should have a standard set of parameters and you shouldn't have to ask questions. But here's some things that you'll probably see in a standard surrogacy arrangement with regards to the pay that she gets. The pay is typically going to come in milestone moments. So for instance, a milestone could be when we sign the contract. When the contract is signed, some agencies even give a surrogate a bonus for signing the contract and getting through that phase of the process. Also, signing the contract would most likely entitle the surrogate to some type of monthly allowance. Now, this isn't the payment for being pregnant, because remember, we just got the contract signed. The ink is still wet, but now she's required to do some things in order to further the surrogacy arrangement. She's now going to have to start going to the doctor. She's now going to have to start taking some shots. She's going to have to go get that contract notarized. She's going to have to FedEx it to her attorney. She's going to need to do a number of things, start taking prenatal vitamins. And so there needs to be some compensation to allow her to do those kinds of things. Another milestone is when she goes in for the embryo transfer. That's a huge milestone because that's the moment when we hope the pregnancy happens. We're going to actually take your embryo and plant it in the surrogate's uterus and hope that it takes, hope that it sticks, hope that it results in a pregnancy. And so there's typically a piece of compensation around her going in for that medical procedure because, again, it is a serious medical procedure. Then we have another milestone when we achieve a pregnancy. 3-4 weeks later, we get the results back. She's pregnant. And then a couple weeks later, we go in and we actually have the ultrasound where we hear that heartbeat. So that confirmation of pregnancy is going to probably trigger those pregnancy compensation payments to begin. So if you're paying her $45,000, and we're going to split that up over 10 months, we get that confirmation, that triggers that first payment of $4,500. And then each payment of $4,500 would follow monthly until we exhaust the rest of the $45,000 or until she delivers, unless she miscarries along the way. And that's what we're talking about. Does she get paid if she miscarries? Again, if we're compensating her for being pregnant, and she stops being pregnant, well, then the contract would need to address how much of that $45,000 she's entitled to, depending on how far along she was when she stopped being pregnant. We mentioned that we discussed some different types of payments, and you've already heard me discuss some of them, like the actual base compensation that she gets for being pregnant, the monthly allowances, everything from maybe even therapy sessions all the way to maternity clothing. But there's one type of payment that when I talk to my surrogates, I tell them I hope they don't get. I say, I hope you do not get paid for this. And that's for loss of reproductive organs. That's one of those things that's discussed and it's covered in the contract in most good contracts. And it says, hey, if for some reason the surrogate undergoes some kind of medical situation where she ends up losing an ovary, losing a tube, or having to have a hysterectomy, then she would be compensated for that loss. That's another type of payment in a surrogacy arrangement. And again, it's one that I hope that none of my clients or no surrogate in the world gets, because to get that payment, you're really suffering through some things. So in short, every step of the way, everything related to the surrogacy arrangement or process really has a type of compensation associated with it, because we're asking the surrogate to perform in a certain way and she's being compensated for fulfilling that obligation or fulfilling that responsibility. So like we said earlier, she gets paid for the pain, for the suffering, for the time, for the effort, for the sacrifices, and going through a miscarriage doesn't exclude her also doing those things. However, a payment isn't automatic. So I encourage you that when you're looking at your surrogacy arrangement, make sure that every detail is spelled out fully as to when your surrogate is entitled to payment and when she's not entitled to payment. And make sure that whoever is responsible for issuing those payments doesn't set it up on autopilot where there's no checking in to see if the things that she's getting compensated for actually happen. Make sure that they're being responsible with the funds that you're using to grow your family. If you want some help in figuring out how to use surrogacy to grow your family, make sure you click the link below. I'll send you a free training called my Surrogacy Secrets Seminar, where I break down how to engage the process of surrogacy in a way that you grow your family and you don't lose sleep, time, or money in the process. So just click that link below and that training will take you from dream to delivery.